You're listening to the Mind Your Own Business podcast, aimed at helping photographers learn how to make the leap from amateur to pro. Hello, and welcome to the Mind Your Own Business podcast, a joint effort brought to you by Photofocus and Cohen University. This is Shamir Young, and I'm joined by my amazing co-host, Skip Cohen. Skip,
wow.
What's up?
I've made it to amazing. That's amazing. Several times.
I can't say it enough, apparently. I gotta hammer it home.
I know. It's wintertime in Florida. And since I always pick on you for the weather in Detroit,
here we go.
I want to remind you that weekend before last, we did hit 35 degrees.
Whoa, you know what? Whoa. Okay. You're getting a little respect from me on the weather front then, because that's it. That's cold.
Of course, 24 hours later, it was 82. So it's bizarre down here. So we have a great podcast today.
Oh my goodness, do we ever? Yes.
Yeah, I'm excited about this. We've talked a lot of times in the past about I've been quoted repeatedly as saying this. The fun of this industry really has very little to do with photography for me, but it's the friendships that come out of everyone's love for the craft. We've got Jesse Feyereisen in the house today, and while I haven't known him very long, what a fun friend he's fast becoming. He's a photographer. His day job is a graphic designer. He's a digital creative artist. It's all being done out of Wisconsin. But he's also a Kelby One Photoshop Guru Award winner with a never-ending passion for toy photography. Platypod, in both the newsletter and blog, recently featured one of his images of Star Wars Darth Maul. And as you stare at the image, you swear it was shot on the sound stage of the movie, and that's the live actor. And that's what makes his work so much fun to look at. Each image has a level of realism that makes it almost inconceivable that it's a toy and not shot in live action. But there's always a but here. But there's a key ingredient you pick up the minute Jesse answers the phone. It's his love and passion for this stuff. Like over half of the professional photographers in this country, Jesse is a part-time artist. But that changes nothing in his skill set and level of expertise. So we're going to talk about his love for imaging, finding balance between his day job photography and his wife, things he's doing to keep building his skills, and as usual, who knows where else we're going to wind up. So Jesse, this is the cue for your lips to move. Welcome to Mind Your Own Business.
Good morning, Skip. Good morning, Shamir. How you guys doing?
We are awesome. We are so excited to have you here.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Long-time listener, first-time caller.
There you go.
As Skip mentioned, we've featured your work on the Platypod blog, and so I've been watching your work for a while now, and it's just so cool to actually get to talk to the man behind these amazing images. I mean, your toy photography is it's outstanding, and it's so creative. And I've been burning just with curiosity for a long time now about you and your background, and so I'm going to kick it off with our favorite first question. Can you tell us how you got started doing what you're doing and how you ended up where you are today?
Yes, absolutely. It was a cold, stormy night. Just kidding. So I started out, I was always very creative as a kid. I spent a lot of time drawing, actually, back in the day. And I always loved movies. I was a big fan of watching movies, and Star Wars, obviously, as you can tell from a lot of my photography. So that just sort of got me interested in movies and working in video. So when I was younger, I really thought I was going to kind of go into working with movies or television or something to that effect. I had a photography class in high school. It was just one semester, but it kind of just sort of gave me the taste for that and how different photography was from video. And back to the video thing, when I was younger, getting very young, I would actually borrow my grandparents' old VHS camcorders, the big ones you put over your shoulder. Maybe I'm aging myself there, but that's okay. And I would make some stop motion videos and stuff with, Hot Wheel cars and action figures and things like that. So back to the high school, that kind of got me into photography, taking that class. And then after high school, I went to school for graphic design, visual communications, and that sort of thing. And I got to kind of get my toes wet in many different aspects, from just standard graphic design stuff to a little bit of 3D modeling and video work there. So then I kind of continued down that road, going into television production, just schooling, thinking I was going to go down that road. And after that, I got sort of what I thought was going to be a temporary job at a custom electronics installation company where we would build home theaters and things, which was right up my alley. It was a super fun technical job there. And that was meant to be just a temporary job while I was looking for something in graphic design. So I think it was only a few months or maybe the summer went by and I found a job that I accepted. And as I was putting in my 2 weeks notice, it was a very small company and they were very much like, hey, no, actually we like what you're doing and we would like to have an in-house graphic designer and such. So I'm like, you know what? Actually, that's great. I love this company. I love the industry. So I just stayed on there as a sort of / technician / graphic designer, photographer, in that aspect. So I worked there for many years, almost a decade, I think. And then in the late 2000s, that's when the economy and the housing market kind of took a hit. So that company unfortunately dwindled down and had to shut down. I got another job as a graphic designer with a new software company. So doing graphic design there, they handed me an old camera. I believe it was a Sony. It was one of their early digital cameras. And so early that it literally had like the 3.5-inch floppy disk as its storage device. I think it was maybe 3 megapixels, 5 if we were lucky, something like that. So I started using that thing to take pictures of some of the job sites. And so some of the home theaters and the homes and the installations that we would complete kind of for the advertising. And that was really cool. So I kind of took that, ran with it, and ended up getting I was fortunate enough to get a Sony CyberShot or something one year for Christmas. And that's where it started opening the doors, because then I could switch that thing into manual mode. And I just started to sort of wrap my brain around photography at that point. And being digital then, it was so easy to take the images, take them right back to the office and start playing with them immediately on the computer. So I started really falling in love with that. And that led to me to getting my first SLR, which was, I think, one of the Canon Rebels back in the day, one of the very early Rebel series. So then I started getting to go down the road with different lenses, because the first one I had to get was like a wide angle lens for shooting interiors in home theaters and such. And boy, I just got sucked in. I started falling out of love with video and in love with photography. And outside of work, I would use my camera and I would just start experimenting with everything. I would start reading books and trying some landscape stuff, or trying a little bit of astrophotography or product photography, still lifes, things like that. And it sort of just never stopped. I mean, that's kind of where it sort of.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And then, like I mentioned, the product photography. So fairly recently, a couple years ago, experimenting with different photography genres and whatnot, going down the road of product photography. So I'm like, this is kind of fun. I can do this in my home office at home on an early morning. I'm like Skip said, I'm from Wisconsin, so we have some cold winters around here, and you kind of got to stay indoors and find things to do. And I started with your basics, like a couple of wine bottles or a scotch bottle here and there, a fragrance bottle, things like that. And my wife and I are both kind of geeky and pop culture and stuff. And I had a Darth Vader figure, like a 12-inch figure that she got me one year for Christmas. And I put that in front of the camera and sort of treated it as a product shot. But then after I started editing the images and looking at them, I was sort of realizing, wow, this actually, if I work with this kind of looks real in a way, or like it looks like a person in costume. If I didn't tell people, I wonder if they would even know. So that sort of kicked off. Gosh, I had so many pop culture things around the house between my wife and I. It's like, I'm just going to grab an action figure here, or grab this little statuette here, and boy, I just kind of ran with it. And with all my years of like Photoshop experience, it was very easy to all of a sudden like, well, let's put a lightsaber in there, see how that looks. Let's put a couple laser blasts in there, see how that looks. Maybe let's superimpose this spaceship on a star field or something. And I just started doing that and haven't stopped since, I guess.
Well, it's really interesting because as you're talking, I was sitting here rolling through your website. Your diversity is really remarkable, not just in your skills with the toys, but I was looking at some of your outdoor work, some of your wildlife work.
Sure.
The exploding pumpkin on the railroad tracks.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
Yep.
just in terms of special effects, you're kind of a one-man band in terms of, or one image band. One photograph being able to tell a whole story. It's great stuff, and that diversity kind of leads me right into my next question of when you're thinking about something and you're visualizing whatever you're going to do next, where's that inspiration come from?
Oh gosh, it comes from anywhere and everywhere. Like it can be something as simple as watching a movie or a TV show. In fact, sure enough, just fairly recently in the Book of Boba Fett, I won't give any spoilers away, but there was a shot a couple episodes ago that, man, I saw it and I'm like, that is a beautiful image and I'm going to recreate that. So I've been kind of prepping that. That'll be a shot coming out in the coming weeks once I shoot it. But yeah, inspiration, I mean, like I mentioned, I mean, I've always been kind of a creative person. And so I've always just, whether I'm driving into work, I can just kind of imagine looking at the horizon and seeing like a ship in the sky or something walking across the snow or, just the visual references that I get from movies and TV shows and other photography, to be honest with you. Like, I'll follow other genres because I'm the kind of person that no matter what you do, I really feel there's so much to be learned everywhere else that then you can take and apply to your own disciplines. Like the Darth Maul shot you were previously mentioning, a lot of that inspiration, I actually shot that after a Kelby 1 portrait photography session or lesson. So I kind of took those same principles and same fundamentals and it's, okay, let's put a figure here and let's think about a portrait shot. Okay, so we probably need like a key light over here and let's maybe a little fill over here or a bounce card and then some sort of back kicker light and just sort of start building the scene based on another genre, but with the tools that I had available to me at the time. And it turned out really good. It was one of my personal favorite shots. And I'm humbled that it's getting so much attention when it was really just an action figure, a couple of, I think at the time I was using two AD200 studio strobes, and they were both in like a 10x24 softbox, I believe it was. And the background was some 3D printed sci-fi panels that my cousin 3D printed for me. And I just put all that stuff together and then a little bit of post-production. I think I used Boris effects to do to create some artificial light leaks. And gosh, what else was in there? Other than that, just kind of basic portrait techniques in that one. So yeah, to kind of come full circle, I mean, my inspiration just comes from all over, not only from just using my imagination, seeing what's around me, just kind of taking in the vibe and looking at other genres of photography and seeing how I can kind of implement my interests and sneak those kind of in there, I guess.
Man, you're so well-rounded. I mean,
thank you.
Looking at not just your work, but your experience with what you've done, what you've had your hands in with graphic design, with video, with all kinds of things. It's cool to see it coming together in your work.
Yeah, I feel that way too. I often joke with my coworkers and people around me that kind of a jack of all trades, master of none sort of thing. But I've sort of recently really found that niche with the toy photography and I almost don't. The term toy photography, I'm not even sure I'm in love with that term because I guess the way I look at it, like kind of how I expressed my love for movies and stuff growing up. I mean, I was so into movies and visual effects as a kid. I would read books on that sort of thing. So I actually sort of look at these toys as more like props in a sense. So yeah, to call them toys, I almost wish there was a better term for that because it tends to bring, I think, a certain image. Like people just don't understand when I mention to them that one of my hobbies is, oh yeah, I've been really getting into toy photography lately. They kind of give me a blank stare and they're like, what, like, what does that even mean? Like catalog, like on white for like an Amazon page or something. No. I take them and I set them up and we do this and that, and they make them look real or something, like you wouldn't know it's a toy. And they're, oh, okay. Well, that's very cool. So I almost these days I'm starting to look at them as more props or something as opposed to toys. But
that makes sense. It's the word toy. I'm not sure if that does your work justice.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah.
With I'm trying to think, maybe prop photography I'll call it prop photography for my next question that I have for you, because with specifically this type of creative prop photography that you do, one thing that really struck me was how, do I want to use the word appropriate, it was during the pandemic when we're all stuck at home. And I don't want to beat a dead horse with the whole pandemic thing, but I want to take this from a positive angle in that type of prop photography. It was part of the reason it was so inspirational was that people could try it at home, which is why we also enjoyed featuring it on the Platypod blog during that time. It was something cool that you could do while still being socially distant. And I'm curious with you, because you seem like such a positive person, just talking to you, even the email exchanges beforehand. And it just, so how did your creativity get you through the pandemic personally and keep you positive?
Sure, yeah. Oh, and just to wrap around to that previous question, I don't mean to diminish the term toy photography in any way. I don't know what a better word for
right.
that would be. I mean, there's a whole genre, and there's some amazing artists out there doing that
Definitely.
stuff. But yes, so the pandemic thing. I mean, I kind of, in the early portion of the pandemic, just sort of set my own self goal that, we're all at home. I was starting to work from home for a little bit, and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to challenge myself to do just one project a week. And I started doing that, and I really stuck to it. And that really forced me to really think about every shot and what the next one would be. And it just kept me, just kept the gears turning. Like I would learn something after every shoot and just kept going. And I try not to repeat myself as best I can, which is certainly a challenge. But when you mentioned helping to inspire other people during the pandemic, that was something that was very important to me as well, because I had someone call me out in the early days of one of my shots saying, that's not real. That's not yours. No way. And I'm like, no, it totally is. So that kind of kicked off me for every shoot that I do, or every project. I try really hard to remember to take a behind the scenes shot so people can see, what was behind the camera, or this entire setup, this world that is in this photograph is really just a little 1 foot by 2 foot space. I mean, really all you have to do is focus on what the lens, that tunnel of vision that the lens has. Nobody knows that there's a light box just inches out of frame, or there's the shadow of the neighbor's chain link fence or something just out of frame, that I've had trying not to Photoshop out and save myself from work. So yeah, I really got into taking those behind the scenes shots and then sort of explaining my process in every post I share, just letting people know, like, oh, okay, so here's the idea I had, and I set a couple of figures up, and the explosion is just all this dust flying in the air is actually just me off camera with a literal, I don't know what you call it. It's like a drain declogging pump or something. I found
it's an air plunger or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. So I'm just out of frame. I pump that thing up, and I've got either my wired remote or using my phone as a remote. And it's like, okay, gonna hit burst mode. Boom, pull the trigger on that thing, and it kicks up a bunch of dust. And you repeat that process 3, 6, a dozen times until you go back to the camera and look at what you just did, and see if you've got the shot yet. And so I really love sharing that stuff with people, and it's I think it helps people see. I have so many reactions like, oh, that's it. That's it. It's like, yeah, that's really all that's going on behind the scenes. You can totally do this. I mean, I'm either in the backyard, I'm in my home office, or going down to the local park to set these things up. And
maybe it's a compliment, that person who didn't believe it was your work in the beginning, or whatever photo it was.
Sure,
in a weird way, maybe. I mean, it was so good that they just could not fathom how you could do it. So that's really interesting.
It's definitely one of those moments that kind of like, it sort of set the template for how I do these projects going forward. Like, and I won't. I have to confess, I think there was one shot. So I try to take that behind the scenes shot every time. I don't always do it because sometimes you take the shot and then I jump on the laptop and then I start breaking down the set. And a couple hours later, I'll be like, oh, shoot, I totally forgot to take the behind the scenes shot.
Right.
And there was one time I actually did drive back to the park that I was at for one shoot and like, I'll just set this up semi how I had it before and just take a quick shot and that'll be good enough. You know, nobody will be the wiser, but it's been a crazy ride.
Well, one of the ingredients. In fact, maybe I have the word for you. You're an illusionist. This is like watching David Copperfield in his earlier days and saying, "My God, how did he do that?" Because I look at your images, and right now I have Darth Maul blown up. I've got a big iMac, and I've got it blown up full screen, as big as I can get it. And I've been staring at this thing because it absolutely has the feel of being on the soundstage, and this is the real actor wearing that mask and makeup. And that's blown up as big as I can get it here. But I share some of the ingredients. I know one of them in this one relates to depth of field and the background you brought in.
Sure.
What are some of those ingredients that you found make it key? And by the way, I totally understand what you were saying about toy photography. This is not the toy photography kind of reduces the skill. And that's why I said I love the illusion that you bring forward that these toys, this is a real actor here, everybody. I mean, you've brought in all those ingredients that you would have on a live movie set.
Sure. So. Yeah. Thank you so much, Skip. That's super kind of you. So that Darth Maul shot, like, kind of like I was mentioning earlier, I really approached it as sort of a portrait shoot because it kind of is essentially a portrait. And I started off with just building the lighting. Like I could go through, like if you were to go through my sequence of shots. So as many photographers, I'm sure, can say the same thing. You know, for every shot I post, you know, there's 30 to 50 shots behind this one that you didn't get to see as I'm assembling the scene and putting this whole thing together. In this case, it really just started with the backlighting. I knew I wanted that background to sort of pop. So I kind of started off with just the one flash that would light the background, the lights. Start taking a couple of shots with that to adjust the lighting to where I wanted it, and then I would adjust. Once I had the lighting down, then I would start adjusting my aperture to kind of dial in. Okay, like how out of focus do I want that background? Is it too soft where you can't really tell what it is, but I don't want it sharp because I want to create some depth there. And then it was on to the second light, which was an above the character light, was just to kind of be the key to fill it in. And then I quickly realized the underside of his face, because he's in a hood, so the underside of his face needed to be lit. So I put a little bounce card, it was just a sheet of foam core, nothing too fancy, just white foam core from a hobby shop. And then once I had the lighting dialed in, then it was a process of getting the characters dialing in the face and the hood. Since it's a 12-inch figure, so the hood that comes over his head, just the fabric doesn't sit like real fabric would to scale. So we'd have to try to weight it down because they would always kind of pop up and it would just look goofy. So there's a series of shots trying to dial that in and then dialing his head kind of, because when you're working with the toys, it's kind of, it takes a cue from macro photography where every little tiny thing counts. Like if his head isn't looking right at the camera, I mean, it could be just a couple of degrees off, but that is so much amplified in like macro and in the scale we're working in. Oh, and then speaking of the scaling work in the dust, every little shots that are that close, every little speck of dust, as much as you try to, I'll use little soft makeup brushes that I got a kit on Amazon, and that's what I'll use, kind of brush off as much as you can. But no matter how much you brush, what you can't see to the naked eye, once you blow it up in camera, it's like, oh my gosh, look at all this. And now I'm going to spend how much time in Photoshop, using the healing brush and the clone tool to get rid of all that dust and such. But then some other ingredients. I mean, I literally used some cues from like the Kelby One portrait photography class that I think I was watching at the time, where just taking things like, grabbing so this was done in a combination of Lightroom and Photoshop, which I'm sure most of the audience here is familiar with. So like the face, I would put a radial gradient over just the face and just bump up the exposure a little bit. Because again, this is essentially a portrait. So what's the most important thing there is, the subject. So, and then I would also use, kind of some of your local adjustment, like the brush tool, and paint in the eyes and kind of increase the exposure for the eyes as well, the clarity a little bit, the sharpness to really get those pop. Yeah, but I guess just all those just treating it like it's a quote unquote real shoot, just kind of turns it into like a semi-portrait shot.
My goodness, that's fascinating.
That really is the key. There's a shot that we used in a Hasselblad ad in one of my previous lives, and later on I think we also ran it as a cover on Rangefinder magazine of Gregory Heisler's, Gregory is one of the finest photographers in the world. At that time he had I think 80 covers of Time magazine or more. Wow. And it was a shot of Vanessa Williams where just her eyes and her eyelashes were in focus. And as I'm sitting here looking at Darth Maul, and you're talking about, I approach it like I would a portrait session, and I'm looking at how narrow the depth of field, where you actually see the texture in the hood, in his cape, whatever we call that, tied in with his face, then tied in with the blown out background, and where you've played with depth of field.
Sure.
It's interesting when you start talking about approaching it as like it's a portrait session.
Kind of, yeah. Yeah,
except in this case, you don't have to feed the model. You don't have to worry about a model release. You're kind of in good shape.
Exactly. And my models, they are very good about standing very still for a very long period of time.
Yes.
So, Jesse, one thing I'm super curious about, because I don't know how you find time to give such deep thought to every single image, I guess, while balancing a day job and being a wonderful husband to your lovely wife. And so could you, how do you find balance in your life? How do you make time for all these things?
Oh boy. Well, I can tell you it's not always easy. Well, I mean, as much as I hate to say it, the pandemic has actually helped because it kind of, forces everyone to kind of bunker down and do your own thing, which my wife and I we're kind of homebodies anyway. Anybody that knows us definitely knows that Katie and Jesse they're homebodies. They like to do their own thing. And so to find balance, I mean, I guess I don't typically do shoots during the week. I kind of like to take, after a long day of work, you kind of want to just come home and not think about stuff for a while. But I typically do my shoots on weekends. Like a Saturday morning or a Sunday morning or something, or depending if I want like an evening shoot, I might do something on a weeknight evening. But no, I've always, when my brain is in the mode coming up with ideas, and I don't know how to explain when that is, but I tend to, I'm starting to get in the habit of writing these ideas down and also drawing like little thumbnails of them. So that way I sort of have a backlog of all these ideas that are kind of in the queue ready to go. And same with shooting these ideas. When I'm like, I set that goal about a year ago to do one project a week. Well, that doesn't limit me from doing 2 or 3 a week. If I'm really, I think it was an Ozzy Osbourne quote or something that I saw that really stuck with me, that he said something about when the songs are coming or when the writing is creative, like keep going, because you never know when you're going to have those droughts, so when strike while the iron's hot, I guess, in a way.
It's true.
So I've always got at least a couple of ideas in the backlog and also a couple of shots in the backlog. So that way, there's definitely those times when either you're creatively kind of stumped for a little while, or, just life gets in the way and things are going on. I've sort of given myself that safety net of, I've always got ideas in the queue ready to go, and I've always got a handful of shots that I haven't released that are kind of in the queue ready to go. So if something's going on this week, whether it's family related, work related, just not enough time, I can always pull from my back pocket, pull out a shot, take a look at it, like, okay, do I want to do any final tweaks or anything. Like, no, this is good to go. I'll do a little write up, send it out there, and just kind of keep them going. And that assignment that I gave myself, doing one a week, really, it was an interesting experiment in discipline, I guess you could say. Mm-hmm. And I'm actually kind of shocked that I've been able to keep it up. But yeah.
I like that. Yeah. And I feel like it would take some of the pressure off of you to actually jot down your ideas when they come to you, so that you have those to call on later. And it just seems like a very good idea.
I honestly, just lately I've just been using the Notes app on my phone. It's like, if I have an idea, I've got a folder there. It's just a list, it's like, oh, okay, do this shot of this XYZ idea or something. And then if I'm really into it, I'll draw a little thumbnail of the shot, so then I can kind of go back to it when I'm thinking of ideas.
I love it.
So
the process is interesting. Yeah.
Well, you had mentioned earlier that some of the things you were photographing early on came out of your at-home stash of eclectic pieces, and your wife got involved, because it also sounds like she may not be pushing the shutter button, but it sounds like she's involved in some of these visions, the same way I laugh about Sheila being my muse when I'm trying to write something. Or, in fact, my wife Sheila, when we first did this podcast 8-9 years ago, Rich Harrington and I were trying to come up for a name for it, and Sheila said, "Why don't you use Mind Your Own Business?" So there she is, and her ability to be my muse kind of lives on. Where are you going next? Because we're almost out of time. But what do you see next as what you want to tackle? Do you want to keep building on the illusions that you create with your toys? Or
sure.
I mean, I'm on your website. I've been clicking through, and it's so diverse, all the way down to travel, and you can see how your background as a graphic designer plays in a lot of your composition.
Oh, thank you.
Because it's the way an image feels. It's what you've got, the main focus on. Where do you want to go? What do you want to be doing 2 years out from now, 3 years out from now? And by the way, saying I have no idea is an okay answer too.
No, I hear you. That is actually a really tough question, because, what do I want to be doing? I love the trajectory that I'm taking with this photography stuff. It's so much fun. It keeps me so engaged, and it's such a challenge that I really love pursuing that kind of thing. I'd love to get some partnerships out there with some people, or maybe some sponsorships, and kind of collaborate with others and keep building this. As far as where I want to be in 2 years, 5 years, all that has always been one of the toughest questions for me, because my career has sort of followed a trajectory of things that just didn't exist a few years ago. So, and I've become very aware of that, where every couple of years, it's like I find myself sitting at my desk doing something that, like, boy, you really couldn't have done this a couple of years ago, or this thing didn't exist. So, yeah, looking forward is always, it's an open book. I could say that, I guess. Who knows?
That's what makes it an adventure, though. Sometimes
Absolutely.
It's fun not to know what the journey is going to bring, and it gives you something to look forward to.
Yep, I completely agree. Yeah,
fully embrace that.
Yeah.
Well, so I know from our perspective, because one of the hats I wear is a platypod hat, and I know we've had a blast. We want to, as many things as you send us, we would love to keep sharing some of those blog posts, because the kind of work you're doing, we always talk about platypod giving people a different perspective, and that's what it's doing in this case. Just like in food photography and some other genres, it becomes one of those tools, and it's so much fun to see the results. And the results with you, you never see the same one twice. It's the way you keep pushing the edge of the envelope.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and I give much thanks to Platypod. I mean, that not only for you guys sharing my work and helping kind of get out there a little bit, but just the Platypod tools. I mean, I think I have 4 platypods. No, 5 now. Now I think about it. I just finally picked up the Max, and the platypods are a staple tool of my camera bag. That, like, 90% of my shots It's so perfect for what I do to get that low angle and unique perspective. Absolutely.
Very cool.
Great stuff.
Yeah.
And Skip, do you think we have time for our final question, or do you want to?
No, let's jump in on let's do our final one.
Sure.
Awesome. So, Jesse, what advice do you have for photographers who are just starting out? Maybe they're living busy lives, trying to balance and juggle multiple aspects of their life. What advice would you have for them as far as finding inspiration and creativity?
Oh, gosh. I guess as far as finding inspiration and creativity, I would just say pay attention to what's around you. There's so much, it's all around us every day. And just kind of learning to look at the world a little differently, I think. So one of my other favorite shots from last year so again, big Star Wars geek. It was a speeder bike going over the snow, just cruising. It was a lot of negative space, not a whole lot to the shot, a little bit of motion blur, but I mean, that inspiration came from me literally looking out the kitchen window one morning and just looking at the pattern of the snow drifts. And I remember looking out there, and I remember even saying to my wife, I'm like, hey babe, that kind of looks, I mean, to scale, that looks like Hoth or something like that. I should get out there. I should run out there this afternoon and do something with that quick. And yeah, I guess for my genre of photography, just to learn to look at things at a different scale sort of is very unique. As far as beginning photographers, things I always like to tell my friends, first off the basics, learn the exposure triangle. Once you learn your ISO, aperture, and shutter speed and how they all relate to each other, you will very rarely ever have to ask someone, what were your settings on that? You always see that question, and it's always that question always bothers me because, like, well, even if I give you my settings as a cheat sheet, 10 seconds after I took that shot, a cloud moved in or something, and the settings would change anyway. So it's not, you can't really use those numbers as a definitive how to take the shot kind of thing. So once you learn that exposure triangle, I mean, you're good to go. Another thing I always tell people is, even if you're doing like street photography or anything, or just out at the zoo or out at the park, I always tell people to, everyone in the world pretty much sees the world at eye level from, 5 to 6 feet tall. So I always encourage people, don't shoot just standing at that eye level, because we've all seen that vision a million times over. Anywhere you stop to take a shot, there's probably a better shot 3 feet from you, whether that's crouching down low or getting up high, going down, taking a step forward to get closer to something, taking a step back. There's oftentimes a better shot within 3 feet of you. And often tell people, don't be afraid to crop. I feel like that's sort of a controversial subject sometimes with photographers, cropping. Of course, you always want to get it best in camera if you can, anytime. But oftentimes I see work from my friends that it's like, oh, you know what? I swear, there's a better shot within the shot. With like, this is a good photo, but there's a great photo in here if you just crop in like this and focus on this one subject. And with my photography, social media has sort of forced me to crop in creative ways, so much so that I've almost gotten to the habit of I'm not sure what the term might be, but I shoot much wider than I often need to, because for my personal taste, growing up loving movies, I love the wide cinescope kind of crops, but that doesn't play very well on a mobile device. It's just this tiny, tiny little stamp. So I'll often have to come up with a composition that is also like a portrait crop. So when someone's scrolling on their phone, it kind of takes up, as much phone real estate as it can. So I'll often shoot extra wide so I can get my widescreen crop, and I can also get a portrait crop out of it. So I often tell people, always crop, or don't be afraid to crop, I should say, not always to crop. What was I had another, yes. Another thing I always tell people is, you've gone to the shoot, you had a good time, you had this great idea, you're spending a little time in post, you're editing it, you're really excited to get it out there. But as soon as you think you're done editing that photo, stop and walk away from it.
Ooh,
because I swear, the amount of times when you can, whether it's break away for an hour, a day, a couple of days, whatever it may be, I guarantee you, when you come back to that photograph that you spent so much time working on, you're going to see it with fresh eyes, and you're going to see things you didn't see before. Like, oh, maybe you pushed the edit too far, or you know what? Oh, there's this little speck of rock over here that's this dark spot that I should really get rid of that. You'll often see your own photo in a different light once you kind of take away the emotions of the shoot and the excitement, and can come back and see it for an image or for a photo. I always find that really valuable, to just step away. Once you're done, think you're done. Step away, come back to it with fresh eyes, and take another look at it before you share it with the world.
Great advice.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Jesse, we do want to make sure to ask, where can folks check out your amazing work online?
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah. So I recently launched a website just here in January at the beginning of the year. It's jessefphotography.com. Since my name's Jesse Feyereisen, I knew nobody was going to be able to remember that. So it's just jessefphotography.com. And then I post pretty regularly on most of the social medias. Instagram once a week. That's probably my favorite spot to post. And Twitter, LinkedIn, all that, or on Facebook, you can find me. And yeah, I try to post every week. Usually it's on a Wednesday, depending on how life is going that week. But yeah.
Excellent. We'll make sure to include that in the show notes too.
Sure.
And Skip, where can folks find you?
It's always the same. Everything I write is at skipcohenuniversity.com, and it's Skip Cohen on Facebook and Skip Cohen on Twitter. And we always want feedback, everybody. So if you've got ideas or a guest request or a topic you'd love us to hit, my email is skip@mei and the number 500.com. And Shamira, I was asked the same question. Where are they going to go to find you?
Folks can send me an email at shamira@photofocus.com. That is my first name, CHAMIRA @photofocus.com. I've got a handful of different emails. They all end up in the same place. So we love getting questions, ideas, feedback, because that absolutely shapes how we move forward with the show and the amazing guests that we have on the show. And Jesse, thank you again. This has been amazing. This has been awesome.
Well, thank you
Good
both
stuff.
so much. Yeah.
Awesome. And we want to thank our listeners for joining us as well. Please tell your friends about this podcast, especially if they have the desire to improve their photography business in 2022. We look forward to having you all with us next time on the Mind Your Own Business podcast, brought to you by Photofocus and Skip Cohen University.